Hello, everybody. Yes, we have finally made it to the top 10 albums of the top 90 albums of the 90s, as voted by you guys. Finally, love getting to the top 10 list. It feels like this has just flown by. And of course, I'm joined as always by Mr. John Stanek of Johnny Radio. But also, we have a very special guest today featuring the dude from the Dude and Grim Show. So glad to have you on. This has been a long time in the making, and I'm glad it's finally happened.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I know we've been trying to get our dates right and everything, and we were talking about doing one in the '80s, but I'm definitely happy we kind of did the '90s because I that's a little more in my what I enjoy like and kind of what I grew up with. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about some of these albums, and man, they brought me back. I will tell you what, listening to some of these again, like man, I was so young and everything when I started getting into these. So it was pretty cool to revisit some of this stuff.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you in the top 10, man. And as you know, we're both big fans of the Dude and Grim show, and the scratch a track. Just everything is so cool the way you guys do it. So it was sorry we had Grim on before you, but
Hey,
we've
that's
got
fine.
mad love for the one and only the Dude.
Oh,
So thank you
appreciate
for joining us, man.
it. Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see if we're
Yeah,
still friends
we
after this episode. So
okay. Serious debates here. All right.
good.
Well, I guess without further ado, let's get right into it. At number 10,
Odelay by Beck from 1996. Yes, what an opener to the top 10. I love this album. It's one that I revisit pretty frequently. I think it's just one of those albums that with him working with the Dust Brothers, especially on this record, because they had their history with Paul's Boutique with the Beastie Boys, and this feels like kind of like Paul's Boutique, but even better in my opinion. Just the genre hopping. I mean, it's all over the place, starting with the hard rock of Devil's Haircut, and then you've got songs like Where It's At, which hops genres within the song. It's with that just awesome opening electric keyboard riff that's so unforgettable, and of course two turntables and a microphone. I mean, just one of the greatest songs of the decade. You've got great ballads like Jackass, which are both kind of ridiculous with especially with the actual donkey sound effects at the end, but also very heartfelt and showed where Beck Hansen was headed in the near future, on some of his more acoustic albums. Ramshackle also is a beautiful closer with that nylon string guitar and the kind of Spanish chord progression. But my God, I mean, there's not a weak track on this record. I love all of them. I think even the country tinge that's throughout the album is really strong on songs like Lord Only Knows. And yeah, it's freaking great, man. It's so weird yet so accessible, and yeah, gotta love it.
oh my goodness. You know what? I've never heard an album like this in my entire life. Like, because sometimes you're like, what genre is this? Is this hip hop, country, soul? Like, it's just a mix of everything. It's got horns, it's got sax, it's got organs, slide guitar, distorted feedback noises, accordions, and like a bunch of crazy samples. And I think, especially considering his earlier work, which was so avant-garde for the sake of being avant-garde. I mean, Stereopathic Soul Manure was an album I put on, and the only album I've never finished that I started for other reasons, but I didn't finish it. But this really, I think this major label debut from Beck is really where he blew the roof off the place. I mean, especially starting off with Devil's Haircut. And his lyrics are so like stream of consciousness and bizarre and so cryptic, and usually I wouldn't be as into that, but it's just the combinations of words that Beck comes up with is so intriguing. And I love so many like Lord Only Knows. My goodness, you come in with that country tinge slide guitar. It really is one of the standouts on the track, and obviously it gives the album its namesake. Of course, you got to talk about the new pollution, which is like this weird take on Tomorrow Never Knows almost. It really does
Mm.
sound like it has that very Western feel and just the drumming going crazy. I mean, really, it's so interesting because he's almost rapping on half of these songs, but he's also singing. And I mean, there really isn't anything like it. Of course, where it's at, you got to talk about two turntables and a microphone. Just so good. Of course, the organ solo comes in the middle in that break, and just oh my goodness, he's like and then the robotic like vocoder vocals, which like predate Daft Punk, man. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Sissy Neck is also another absolute favorite of mine, you know. It just really crazy musical chops all across the board. Nothing like it before, and maybe nothing like it since. This wasn't quite in my top 10. I think it was just outside of my top 10, but I couldn't think of a more deserving choice to be in the top 10 albums of the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those albums that kind of, I mean, you guys touched on so many points where just all the different sounds, all the different genres. I mean, he, like you said, he's rapping in some song, he's singing or speaking Spanish. I mean, it's just there's some just incredible work on this album. And here's the deal, like this album isn't for everybody, but it is for me. Like this is it just goes
Yeah.
so many different places. You can't really. I mean, I don't even know what to say. What genre you put it in? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just it's really it's a work of art. And even if it's not your style of music, I definitely think, you have to appreciate just, just, I mean, the production. Can you imagine editing this? Like that would
No.
be insane. That would just, that makes my head hurt. And it's just an exceptional album. And, when I was doing a little research on it, this is his fifth studio album. Like,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
that's, like he'd been around, he'd done some stuff, like he'd been around for a bit. Obviously Loser was a hit, and that propelled him,
Yeah.
probably kept him a little relevant for some people and with record companies and everything. But man, yeah, this came out and just unbelievable. And one thing I gotta say, just for this album and this era, and I don't know if you guys have been talking about this a lot, but the music videos are so important, I think, to these albums in the 90s, because
Hmm.
they had such, people were putting these out, big budgets, they're putting a lot of thought, like people are choosing directors by the work that they've done before, like Mark Romanek. I think he did
Yeah.
Devil's Haircut. I mean, Becca's work was some of the best out there. And when you have those great music videos, they can take songs, I think, and just elevate them to another level. And to me, that really elevates the album as well. And with Devil's Haircut and Where It's At, those music videos are just, they're great. They're just so well done. So for me,
Classic. Yeah.
no problem being in the top 10. I don't know if it was in my top 10. I have to check my list a little close, but have no problem with it whatsoever.
Yeah, I had it at number 11. I just checked a little while ago. So yeah, it was just right outside. But yeah, one more thing that I wanted to say is just I imagine them having so much fun in the studio
Oh,
making this record. Like just they have this little drum break, and then there's that guy saying, "That was a good drum break." And it's just like,
Yes.
it's you gotta love, and it's just those little instances that make this record so much fun
yeah,
to listen to. It had to be a joy to make as well.
100%.
Absolutely. And then also like you have really beautiful ballads like Ramshackle closing this thing out.
Mhm.
And it's like, wow, like obviously you don't want that tenderness throughout the entire album considering what
No.
Beck's doing, but to really close it out that way, you could cut off Computer Rock, let's be honest. But just where I've heard that had been called sounding like refrigerators having sex, which is kind of apt, but I really think that is such a beautiful way to close out such an eclectic and bizarre and just wholly unique album that really is a work of art, and I think that alone deserves its spot in the top 10. So absolutely phenomenal choice, guys. Glad to see it this high on the list, and that's going to take us to number 9.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine?
Dookie by Green Day from 1994. Gotta represent Green Day, one of my favorite bands. And of course, this is yet again another instance where this was not their debut album, but it was their major label debut and really shot this band into the stratosphere with these short pop punk songs that really changed the whole game of pop rock music at the time. Of course, just starting off in the beginning with Burnout, you get all the pent up angst and frustration coming from the frontman Billy Joe Armstrong, really writing these tight, catchy songs throughout this entire record, even though they all sound a little bit similar, and I'll get into that. But I mean, what a great way to start this off, having a blast yet again. Another really dark track, because I really think you can tell at this point how clever of a songwriter Billy Joe Armstrong is, despite the kind of immaturity of a lot of these songs. But I think that's part of the appeal. And then, of course, you get to the one standout on this album that sounds unlike anything else, with the magnificent drumming from Trey Cool, who I think is one of the best drummers of all time. I don't think he gets his fair share. But Longview, which might be the best song about masturbation to ever exist, and I'll bite my lip and close my eyes, take me away to paradise. I mean, it's just such a catchy song, and oh my god. And then going right into, speaking of Paradise, Welcome to Paradise, one of their absolute best hooks, which was on their other album. I think it was on Kerplunk before that. And of course, Basket Case with the iconic hook, do you have the time to listen to me whine? I mean, I feel like that might be their most well-known and popular song, and for good reason. It really just kind of emblemizes everything great about Green Day and Billy Joe's songwriting. And she has some of the most beautiful like that line where he says she screams in silence, and then talks about like smashing smashing the sound of silence with a brick of self-control. I mean, just absolutely incredible lyrics on that song in particular. And then, of course, When I Come Around, yet again, is one of the Green Day's most iconic hits. And yet again, with good reason. You can't go without hearing that on alternative 90s radio stations. I mean, just this whole album, not only does it delve into, I guess, kind of the psyche of Billy Joe Armstrong and his angst, but really offers a glimpse into maybe the best pop punk band of all time. Though I will say, because all these songs sound super similar, and of course you could cut off the stupid Trey Cool song at the end, All By Myself, and of course the song before, I'm Not Huge On. I don't think it deserves to be this high on the list if we're talking about quality overall. Definitely deserves to be in the top 25, but I will say, I mean, this is such an iconic album. I can see why it made it this high on the list, and it was certainly definitely in the upper echelon on my list. So really glad to see it nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a bit too high. I didn't have it nearly this high on my list, but I mean, for all the songs that you mentioned, I mean, they're all classics, all iconic, and Billy Joe Armstrong, I think his knack for melody is so strong, especially on Basket Case and She, and I just remember when this came out, it being just such just a breath of fresh air at the time. And as you mentioned, one of the best songs about masturbation ever. When they hit with that music video, it was like, who the hell are these guys? But it was just like so great, and you almost felt like, especially with his kind of fake European accent, the way he sings, I almost thought like maybe they were from London or something. But just these three American dudes who are fantastic at their craft. And When I Come Around, that was one of those songs, like one of the first songs I learned to play power chords on guitar, because it was just like
Nice.
3 chords or whatever. So you gotta love it. But I agree. I think half of it is great. The other half's kind of like so just kind of recreations of the other songs. So to me, I think it is a bit high, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, I agree with you guys too. It's definitely, it was on my list. I do think it is ranked a little high. But one of the things I think with we are talking like, hey, this is top 10. Like
Yeah.
you need the great iconic songs, which this album 100% has. And I think the songs around it complement those other songs very well. It's a 15 song album coming in at 38 minutes, and the songs hit. They're very punchy, catchy melodies, like you said. And one thing you said, John, was it was a breath of fresh air. right?
Hmm.
Okay, this is 94. February 94 comes out. Kurt passes away April 94.
Right.
So people were, I mean, if this had come out a year or two earlier, I don't know if it would have taken off or had
Hmm.
quite the success because people were pretty, still holding on to that grunge thing. But I think, once, you know, I don't know, once Kurt passed away, and I think people were kind of ready for, something else, or just like, hey, we
Yeah.
need we need to take a break for a minute. And this album really does, like, I hadn't listened to it in so long, but it really does touch on sort of that teenage adolescent angst. Like, I just feel like this is the ultimate teenage album. And I think, like, I was, let's see, 94, so I was 12, almost going to be 13. So it was like almost perfect timing for me, right? Like, I was figuring some stuff out at that point, and it was just
Right.
like, it just really good. And I think it does have sort of an uplifting quality to it, whereas kind of a lot of the grunge stuff that I really like has a more darker, bleaker sort of look at life. And I feel like this had more of, like, it's got that punky feel. It's got some
Hmm.
energy to it that I think is just yeah, very refreshing.
And it's interesting too, since you mentioned the whole Nirvana thing. I remember at the time when they came out, MTV was trying to push them as like the next Nirvana
Oh,
because they were a three-piece. They were punk rock in a different way, but I just always thought that was interesting and maybe a little pushy at the time,
a little bit,
but it worked out for their benefit. So,
certainly.
yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say for me personally, because I mentioned they are one of my favorite bands. I would say after Radiohead, and keep in mind this is including Nirvana. I'd say they're probably my favorite band of the '90s after them, and I think maybe too because they've had more of longevity than Nirvana in regards to like how many records they've come out with. But I just absolutely love the hookiness of Billy Joe Armstrong's melodies, and I think you continue to get better after this point. And there's a couple albums I think succeed this in quality, but certainly I think that this is maybe their most iconic, and I think the one that most people can agree on is one of their best. So absolutely great choice regardless, and that is going to take us into number 8.
Zion.
The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill from 1998, her debut and so far only studio album. And I think it goes without saying it makes sense why she hasn't made another album, because she really says that inspiration has to be, it has to strike, she has to be inspired to make music. And my goodness, was she inspired when she made this album. And not only, I mean, let's be honest. Yes, this is the highest hip hop album on the list, and quite frankly, I think it's too low. This should at least be in the top 5 if we're talking about the most iconic albums of the '90s, right? This and Nevermind are always the two that come up the most, I think, and I think by far the two most influential records of the '90s by far. You're giving that look, but I am right. But this is the thing, because not only the way she can, like, she fused neo soul with hip hop and all the R&B, all these instrumentals going on, but the way that she not only rapped but sang on this album, even more so than the score. This really was unlike anything we had ever heard before, and I just think her lyricism on this thing, though I know some people argue whether she deserves full credit on the songwriting, I think the heart really feels like it is being poured out into all these songs, and all these really, really great messages. Whether it be about you know uh abusive relationships like X Factor, which I think is one of the most beautiful songs on this entire album, whether it be about motherhood, because I think To Zion really is the standout track on this album, featuring Carlos Santana on guitar, and just such a beautiful, beautiful song, with the gospel choir coming in the middle of that chorus is just incredible. And I just love, like, she's like hearkening herself to the Virgin Mary, but it doesn't feel in a way where it seems very self-gratuitous or, kind of like gloating her ego. It really feels like this is something holy that she has been chosen to carry out. And I just love her perspective on this song, and I think why it is my favorite track on this whole thing. Of course, the iconic classic doo-wop, that thing where she's offering kind of multifaceted advice to boys and girls, talking about how people will use each other for sex and to kind of be aware of the dangers of that. I mean, so many topics on here, a lot about relationships, which makes sense, considering where she was at this point in her life. Of course, Forgive Them, Father, talking about people who are, false friends to you and who will end up betraying you in the end, with that amazing hook that forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, and that's the whole thing about this album. The hooks on here are just incredible from top to bottom. I think almost every single song on this album is beyond catchy, beyond melodic. Of course, and then of course you even have ballads with D'Angelo, like Nothing Even Matters. Of course, the king of neo soul himself coming on and really making one of the most cool and smooth R&B ballads from the 90s, as you'd expect. And of course, Everything Is Everything, yet again, another phenomenal introspective song. And even there's a cover of Frankie Valli's Can't Take My Eyes Off You, which, I mean, I prefer the Frankie Valli version. And I do think you could cut off, one or two hidden tracks, but I also love on this thing how you have the interlocking kind of like sequiturs with the classroom, and I think really adds to the theme of the album, Miseducational Lauryn Hill, and just these genuine dialogues between these students and this teacher talking about subjects like love and life, and really has some very, very very thoughtful answers, I think, sprinkled throughout, just getting this genuine dialogue going on. You can tell really, and this is why I say it is probably the most influential album of the 90s, after Nevermind, because this influenced everybody who came after, whether it be Adele, Amy Winehouse, Drake, literally all these people. Well, Drake says he was the first one to rap and sing, but Drake's overrated anyway, and we shouldn't listen to a word he has to say. But regardless, I think that you can tell, like, especially when it comes to neo soul and female singer-songwriters that came out and dominated the 2000s and 2010s. This was a revolutionary record. Even Kendrick Lamar says it's one of his biggest influences. So yeah, this album is, I think, without peer, really. I think if it weren't for Beauty and the Beast, mind you, this would have been my favorite album of the 90s. And I think definitely beyond deserving of a spot, not just the top 10, but maybe even the top 3. This is one of the best albums ever made.
You forgot to mention the College Dropout, man. I'm sure that influenced that as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, he even
But,
uses well, I know he didn't get to get her to sing on the sample, but he uses a Lauryn Hill sample on that album. So yeah, absolutely. I forgot to mention Kanye, but that's a whole other thing we'll get into.
Yeah. So with that being said, like, I agree about the influence. And I think she's definitely a super talented artist. I just think the album overall is a little overrated. And I know I'm going to be in the minority for you guys and probably the world for saying that, but it's just not one that I tend to revisit much. Like, aside from the couple of songs that you referenced, Doo Wop, which like the dude said, benefited from another great music video with like the multiple Lauryn Hills. I thought that was really cool at the time, but yeah, it's just, I don't know. I can't say it's her voice, because she has a great voice and a great rapping voice as well.
One of the best rappers, yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's weird too that this is her only album. You would have thought she'd be one of those artists that would be still doing it today, but I guess some could say, this is a Neutral Milk Hotel in the airplane over the sea situation, where she was like, I can't top myself, so I'm not going to do it anymore. So, but yeah, I know it's going to sound crazy that I think it's overrated or shouldn't be this high, but just for example, I think the Low End Theory should have been higher as far as a hip hop album, but that's just my personal taste. And yeah.
Right, but just because you don't enjoy it as much doesn't mean it's overrated.
I don't know. Let's see what the dude says.
Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a tough one for me, because I never really got into this album, and I know the hits, knew the hits. Now listening to it, I mean, I'd probably listened to it a few times. It never hooked me, never stuck with me.
Me too.
Listening to it kind of now, it's been a very long time. I really like, I had to kind of put it in perspective a little bit, and I really, what I appreciate about it is sort of the originality, the uniqueness, the authenticity of this album. It's very honest. It reminded me a lot. I sort of equate it in its authenticity to Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On." How in you know, Rolling Stone, when they were ranking their stuff, I think recently, that was number one. Now, I can't put that at number one. I think it's a phenomenal album. I think it's great. And so for this one, it's tough to me. Like, I wouldn't rank it this high. I think the more I listen to it, I might gain a deeper appreciation for it. I think one thing that needs to be said too is, you know, it must have been really difficult, you know, being a woman in this time period to really come out with music and break through. Even if you look at, you know, the list that you guys have, I mean, other than Bjork and Alanis Morissette, how many other, you know, are there other women or female groups?
Liz
Mariah
Phair
Carey
made
showed
it.
up. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Madonna's on there a couple
Okay,
times.
Madonna's. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Janet Jackson. Yeah.
Janet
Okay.
Jackson, of course, Velvet
Yeah.
Rope.
But, you know, primarily during the 90s, when I guess when I think of the 90s, it's kind of this male rock driven sort of genre. Like, you know, obviously there's standouts here and there, 100%. And I think, you know, there were some great songs on here, and I think it's, you know, again, very authentic. You get the woman's perspective of life and love and everything. And it's a very like okay, this is her album. I'll tell you what, like she got it out. I mean, it's 16 songs. It's an hour and 50 minutes. Compare that to what we just talked about with Dookie.
Yeah, yeah.
Dookie's 15 songs, and it's like 38 minutes. This song is like, this album has one more song, and it's almost like twice as long, you know?
Yeah,
So,
it's a little on the long side. I think you have to admit, Nathaniel.
Yeah,
Don't you
no,
think?
that's probably my issue. That's probably why it's not like a, let's say, a 9.5 out of 10 for me. And I think if some of the songs were cut down, it probably would be my number one album of the 90s. But that's the thing, like, whether you fully enjoy it or not, there's no denying. And I think to what you were saying, where you're talking about the authenticity of it, really giving her perspective. There was nothing like this at the time, especially in hip hop, especially in R&B. Well, I mean, there were a few that were kind of similar, but this really blew the whole door open for everybody who came after, and just musically created something I think really pointed to the way of the future and where music was headed. Where I think, you know, like, yeah, you talk about the 90s being dominated by rock, but I think if we're talking about like hip hop and R&B, this is really the peak of it all, and just really showed where everything was headed. I mean, nothing was the same after this album came out in 98, and that's why I think it should definitely be in the top 5, but maybe based on what you guys said, that's why it is this low at number 8 here. So have to have it on this list, though. I mean, really, just one of the, and as I said, not most influential albums of the 90s, but one of the most influential albums of all time. So yeah, absolutely amazing choice, though. I think could be a little bit higher, but regardless, let's move on to number 7.
Automatic for the People by REM from 1992. Yeah, I'm glad it made it this high. It wasn't quite this high on my list, but it was in my top 20. I mean, this is an absolute classic. I think it's their best album, which is saying something. I mean, not a weak track on the album, opening up with the beautiful and kind of dark acoustic drive, which builds with that orchestra, and then of course with it comes in with more electric guitars as it goes. But I just love it, and vocally, Michael Stipe just so good throughout the whole record, but on that song especially, how he's, you know, channeling the old Rock Around the Clock song with his lyrics, but just gives us this whole different vibe. And then, of course, you know, Everybody Hurts it's just such a beautiful song about empathy and how, you know, the title says it all. But I think that song for me is what really hooked me into it. And when I got into this album, it was several years after it came out, and I was going through kind of a tough time. And this is one of those albums that has like, I can't quite explain, but I almost call it like a healing power to it, because not just that song, but multiple on here that have that kind of feel to it. Sweetness Follows is another where I believe it's about the death of a friend. And it just feels very humanly warm, like just like you're hanging out with a good friend. And I mean, you've also have other great songs like Man on the Moon, and of course Night Swimming, which had kind of a second life years after this came out. And I always forget to mention the beautiful harmonies of Mike Mills, and I believe he's playing piano on Night Swimming as well. Really great multi-instrumentalists. All four of them are great instrumentalists from Athens, Georgia. And yeah, I think this is their finest hour. I don't know what else to say, but if you haven't heard this, you're missing out. And I think this is at a great spot.
I almost agree with everything you say there, though I think for me personally, I had this more in the 30s range. I think that this album is slightly overrated, but that's not to say it isn't great, because I get most people would say that this is one of the most influential and best albums of the 90s. But everything else you said, I mean, absolutely, this is their finest hour. And I think it's interesting because this album, the lyricism's a little less cryptic than maybe some of their previous work that we've discussed in the series before, and just their albums in general. But I really think that this is where they hone in with these beautiful, beautiful string arrangements from John Paul Jones that I think absolutely add so much, especially on so many greats. Like you were saying, I definitely think the Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight, which was kind of like their rewrite of The Lion Sleeps Tonight, but hardly sounds anything like it. Even though it's kind of nonsense lyrically, like it's just such a catchy song. Absolutely. I love that song. As you said, Everybody Hurts. I mean, my goodness, just Michael Stipe's raw and just really empathetic vocal performance, I think stands out as one of his absolute best that he's ever done. Though I will say, I definitely don't think that every track on here, maybe this is why it's not as high for me. I don't think every track on here is great, especially like New Orleans Instrumental #1 or Starving Kitten. I think Starving Kitten's kind of a weak song. But as you said, I mean, Monty's Got a Raw Deal. I love that song, you know, kind of talking about Montgomery Clift and kind of like his whole tragic story in Hollywood and what happened to him. I really just love when anyone writes a song about Montgomery Clift, because he was such an interesting guy in the film industry. And of course, I mean, I gotta talk about the last few songs that close this out, especially Man on the Moon, which I'll be honest is my favorite REM song of all time. And obviously such a great ode to Andy Kaufman, you know, the late comedian. And I just love, I mean, one of the most beautiful hooks ever. And of course I love when they're like saying, Andy, are you goofing on Elvis?
Elvis,
Hey,
hey,
baby.
baby.
Like,
Yeah.
and Michael
So good.
Stipe does his best Elvis Presley
Elvis.
impression.
It's so
But
good.
really,
Yeah.
dude, it's such a great maybe one of the greatest tribute songs of all time to anybody. And of course that hook, if you believe and there's a man on the moon, or they put a
Mhm.
man on the moon. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
so catchy. Really one of the absolute best songs, as in my opinion. Of course, Night Swimming I think is so beautiful, as you said, with that beautiful piano playing from Mike Mills, and just such a great song about nostalgia and kind of like kind of this lost era of time that you'll always look back on fondly. I think we can all relate to that in some sense. And it just started with them skinny dipping in a pool one night and looking at that photo in the rear view mirror. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And of course, Find the River is such a beautiful way to close out a great album, one of the best alternative rock albums from the 1990s. I definitely, you know, if I were to kind of like remove my own personal feelings away, because I do love this album, I think maybe it should have been in the top 20, but I can see why a lot of people decided to vote this into the top 10. As you said, it's a great record. It's REM's best. I mean, how can you not love it?
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I was kind of surprised that it was this high, and I think it's a great album. I really do. I guess I don't hear enough people talking about it or talking about it in sort of this light or ranking it that high. I feel like it's almost an album that does get lost in the shuffle, and I haven't. You know, it'd be interesting to go back and see what, you know, the like the Rolling Stone and whatnot is kind of ranked it at, or what number and everything.
Yeah. Well, to interject for just a
Yeah.
sec, they ranked it in the top 100,
Okay.
for whatever that's worth. But like that's kind of why I was like, okay, I know a lot of people
Like
do
of
love
all
this song.
time, top 100?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was like 90 something. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you know, I was, you know, when you let me know what ones in the order, I was kind of like, oh wow, okay, automatic for, oh, all right, all right. You know, I have a hard time for myself ranking it at number 7.
I agree with you.
There's a whole plethora of albums that I would rank higher. I think it, for me, I might have had it like in the 50s, to be honest with you. But it's so funny because this is, you know, I had this CD growing up. And at this time, this is 92. I was 10 years old, man. I was
Wow.
10, and I'm listening
Yeah.
to Everybody Hurts.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, wow. It's just funny. I didn't fully realize that and appreciate that until I was making my notes for this, and I was like, "Whoa!" I was listening to that, and you know, just before that, they had come out with "Out of Time." I really liked the song "Losing My Religion" a lot.
Mhm.
And then, but I was also listening to like Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and was super into that and everything. So it was just like, it's just crazy that I was 10 years old and this is the stuff I'm listening to. You know, and in REM, just, you know, what an interesting band. I mean,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, they talk about a band that's really held true to their identity and made the music they wanted to make. You know, going through the 80s when you had a lot of the glam hair and all this stuff, that they weren't doing that. And then here in the early 90s, they're coming out with this, when, you know, that, you know, like I was saying, the Guns N' Roses era and Metallica with the Black Album, and then you have you know, grunge rock and everything coming in. They come out with this album, like
Yeah.
this. I mean, a
So
lot of
different.
people would consider this almost like easy listening or something, but some of the songs are just so emotional, very beautiful. And you know, we talked a little bit about music videos. I just watched again the music video for Everybody Hurts. Wow. I mean,
Brilliant.
that is just exceptional. Some really really great work. So I highly recommend, if people haven't seen that video or haven't seen it for a long time, give it another watch. Because I just thought it was really exceptional, and just kind of spoke a lot, and spoke a lot too about mental health.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing that's very, you know, prevalent now, I think, in our society. People are feeling open about speaking about that type of thing, and to see this sort of, you know, in a music video in 1992 is pretty profound. So
Absolutely, yeah. I think REM. It's funny, yeah. You know, I didn't really think about that, but it seemed like they always kind of zigged when everyone else zagged, as far as that they never followed the trends, and in a way, they set a lot of trends doing that. So, yeah, and they were big fans of their contemporaries at the time. He became friends with Kurt Cobain, and of course, their next album would be an ode to him, Monster, that was all electric. So, you know, it's yeah, they're I don't know if I would call them underrated as a band. A lot of people would probably say they're overrated, but um I think they're just one of the most interesting bands of all time, and yeah, definitely one of their best.
No, and I, you know, to your point about them being underrated, overrated, I don't know. Like, I think if you really look at what REM did, you know, especially during the 80s, sticking to what they believed and staying true to themselves and just their style in general. I mean, Nirvana wouldn't exist without REM. So I think in a lot of ways they're one of the most influential bands of all time. I don't think one of the absolute best, but I certainly think that they deserve to be recognized for their influence on rock music and music in general. Because yeah, I really think that if this says anything, maybe people do feel that way. And like you were saying with the thematics of this album, I really do think maybe that's why it has stood out above a lot of the other albums that came out at that time, what they were talking about and how it resonated with a bunch of different people. I really think that that is maybe key into some of these albums being this high on lists like Miseducation of Lauryn Hill or anything like that. So yeah, absolutely a great choice. So I would have had it lower. I can certainly be okay with it being in the top 10. So that's a great choice, guys, and that is going to take us to number 6.
Weezer, aka the Blue Album. You gotta love an album that is just, you know, a color, right? I mean, it's we got the black album, the white album. I'm sure there's other color albums that I'm forgetting out there, but you know, if you come up with a colored album, like there's a chance it's probably going to be really good. So, you know, no exception here. This is a very good album. I had not listened to this album in a long time, my friends, a long time, and it was just really fun to put it on again. You know, you hear some of the songs, you know, the hits out there and everything, but to really go through and listen to this album again, wow, it just brought back a lot of just memories, riding in the car, watching MTV, all that stuff. And you know, for me, having said that, I was never the hugest Weezer fan. I just wasn't. The music I tend to gravitate toward had a little more edge to it, probably a little darker. But just like we were talking about with Dookie, I think this came out at the right time. This was
94.
Yeah,
Oh.
94 May, a couple months after Dookie. Again, this came out after Kurt passed away, and I think people were ready for something a little lighter, a little more fun, a little more just not as dark and dreary. And I think they really hit it with that. And you know, look, it's 10 songs. They got what, at least 3, if not 4, like huge. We got Undone, Sweater Song, Buddy Holly, and Say It Ain't So. So those are, you got your pillars, right? And then they have some really nice songs that go around it as well. They were massive radio hits, huge on MTV. I think if we did like a top 10 best music videos in the 90s, Buddy Holly would probably be on that. That Spike Jonze directed it. Like, dude, just phenomenal music video. And again, people talked about it, right? People talked about it, and I really feel like, I mean, it's a great song, but that also like added another aspect to it, and just kind of made everything, I don't know, just made it bigger. I think. You know, for me personally, I have a hard time ranking this at number 6. Again, I think it's a great album, very timely, and some really good songs. Just for me, it's just a little too high. It's a little. I mean, I could do top 15, but I look at the list and man, I could put Super Unknown, Siamese Dream, Melancholy, The Bends. You know, there's some other Downward Spiral. I mean, for me, Weezer never really grabbed me. I needed like a little more edge, but it was a lot of fun to listen to and just revisit it again.
Well, let me tell you something. I would put none of those albums above the Blue album. So there you go. Once again, we're talking about what we enjoy here. But really, I think I will say I think I had this in my top 15. It was probably like number 15 or somewhere around. I don't remember if it was above or below Aquemini. It might have been just below. But regardless, I can certainly see why this made the top 10. Maybe not above like Miseducation or something, but I totally understand why so many people love this album, including myself. Of course, you got Rivers Cuomo coming in and writing these songs that are just so much fun, and just to see these kind of like geeks be making like legitimately great rock music. I think that's part of the appeal for a lot of people, because I think a lot of people maybe saw themselves in these guys, which is maybe why they set themselves apart from more of the grunge heavy acts like Nirvana or Pearl Jam and whatnot. But I mean, these songs, as you said, they're just absolutely so much fun from top to bottom. You know, I love No One Else is one of the funniest songs about misogyny ever. It's just hysterical and has such a great hook to boot. The World Has Turned and Left Me Here is another really great song on here. Buddy Holly, you know, believe it or not, I've always found the song to be slightly overrated. Like, I know it was a big hit and everything, but I never really fully was gripped by the storytelling in this song, even though I'm a huge Buddy Holly fan. I don't know, I just never maybe hit me that way, but I recognize that it was a big hit for them, and a lot of people think it's their best. But Undone, the Sweater Song, it would just that slinky riff, that do 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 do,
And another great music video too, man.
yeah.
That
Dude.
one shot of them going around. Yeah, it's great.
and I just love the little interludes, like, you going to the party tonight? Or, this is a great party, man. He's just like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just like the most dry response. And then of course, just that hook. If you want to
To
destroy
destroy
my
my
sweater,
sweater.
whoa,
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 whoa.
whoa.
Pull
Yeah.
the string as I walk away. And then of course eventually when it
Yeah.
when it unravels and you see his Superman skivvies. I mean, it's just so funny, man. And I just think very, very interesting tonally speaking. And also if you guys have seen, I love that Vine where like these middle schoolers are at a talent show and then like they're starting to play the song and then the keyboard just like falls on the ground. I feel like that's in the absolute spirit of Weezer, you know what I mean? But so many great songs in here. Surf Wax America just shows the great these layered textures and harmony parts that Rivers Como put together, I think, so beautifully. So in the garage is just these guys in the garage making music that they love, listening to their favorite rock band Kiss. I mean, it's just absolutely hysterical. I love it. But to me, Only in Dreams is probably my favorite Weezer song of all time. It's almost 8 minutes long, and I just think it's just so ambitious musically, but also what it's saying about kind of like imagining this ideal girl and being with her, and then you realize it can only happen only in dreams. I feel like a lot of people can really relate to that song. And then of course that guitar solo that just just the instrumental build by the end of this album is absolutely incredible, makes it so euphoric. And I just think what a beautiful way to end such a fun and iconic pop record. You see the album cover, it's been memed to death at this point. Everybody knows what you even have. Carl Weezer covers of Weezer. I mean, it's just absolutely one of the most iconic albums from the 90s. And I was surprised to see it make the list this high, but glad to see it here.
Yeah, I mean, everything you guys said, plus, Say It Ain't So, I think is my favorite. Just that opening guitar riff is so cool.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I mean, for a bunch of geek rockers, I think it's like one of the coolest songs. And then it gets so heavy too, thematically, like when he gets to the bridge, talking about absentee fatherism and stepfather and all this stuff. It's pretty heavy, man. And again, guitar wise, Rivers Cuomo, man, like he makes that guitar sound huge, especially on the chorus. Say it ain't so.
And Brian Bell, of course.
Yeah. Great stuff, man. And yeah, I mean, I can't add much else other than you can hear so many different influences, like on Surf Wax USA, a little bit of Beach Boys and like all kinds of stuff that they just put through their filter, which is so magical. I do also think this is rated a little high on the list. I wouldn't have had it in the top 10 personally, but I can see why it's so beloved and ended up this high. So can't fault it.
Yeah, if it was like number 10 or something, maybe that'd be a better spot. But I can't blame for anybody for rating this album this high. It's an absolute 90s classic, and I think one of the best albums of that era. So yeah, guys, that is the first half of the top 10. What do you guys think? Did a lot of your choices make this episode? Let us know in the comments. And of course, we have to thank you for coming on. Of course, the dude from the Dude and Grim Show. If you guys haven't checked out Scratch a Track yet, you have to, because these guys' content is so quality, feels very, very expertise, and I really appreciate all the effort that you guys put in your videos, man.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you guys having me on here, and yeah, this has been fun. I can't wait to do it again sometime, and I'm really looking forward to your guys 1 through 5. Like, it's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, man. Can't wait. Thank you again, dude. It's been a pleasure, man, and can't wait to see more of your great content, man. And yeah, next week, guys, it's on.
Closing it out, and it's going to be a big episode, so you're not going to want to miss it. And once again, thank you for tuning in with us all this time, and we will see you in the next episode.
Peace.